Hey there, and welcome back to another Percy Jackson and the Olympians Season 2 review. And today we're going to be talking about the latest episode to drop, Episode 8, The Fleece Works Its Magic Too Well, which also serves as a finale to the season. I know that if you go online, there seems to be a lot of hate that's been directed towards the show, but to tell you the truth, I've actually loved this season, particularly for the way it's fleshed out a lot of the side characters such as Tyson and Clarice, and made them feel far more well-rounded and important. I know there are those that are rather annoyed at some of the bigger divergences from the book, but at the same time, I do think a lot of these changes have been for the better in terms of the adaptation. Then again, I know that I'm also biased towards this because I was never much of a fan of the Sea of Monsters book. Anyway though, there isn't much else to say about this, so let's jump right into the finale, right? Oh wait, before we go there, I will say that this is a review that's dealing with full spoilers, so if you don't want to know what's potentially coming up, then this video is probably not for you. We started the episode with yet another look at the arrival of Luke, Grover, Annabeth and Thalia at Camp Half-Blood, which ends with the death of Thalia. We've already seen this scene a few times by this point in the season, but now we get to see elements of the scene that we hadn't seen before. The four are making their way across the field when they're confronted by the Furies, and here we see that unlike in previous showcases of this moment where Thalia tells them to run and they instantly leave, she actually stops and talks to Luke and convinces him to get Annabeth to safety. So suddenly I'm really feeling the romance vibes here with Thalia and Luke, right? The emotional eye contact, the music they're playing. I hope they keep it running a bit longer in the future. We need some more scenes of the two of them before they decide that the other is simply an enemy, you know? Their stuff in Titan's Curse is going to hit like crack. I can feel it. Emphasizing this as opposed to having the Annabeth/Luke stuff is such a better idea than what we got in the book. I will go to my grave wondering what the hell Rick was smoking with that shit. A one-sided crush? Yeah, that's fine, but what he wrote was weird and you know it. I love when Thalia then went over to square off with the Furies. She just seems so badass in that moment, you know? We then move over to the car where Percy's still in his own head about what's going to happen. He knows that Clarice will be bringing the fleece to the tree and that Thalia will come back, but his dreams suggest to him that in the end, this might be a bad thing. That she might be the prophecy child that will potentially bring about the fall of Olympus and be the champion of Kronos. He knows that he will never join up with Kronos and he has no idea that Nico and Bianca exist at this point in time. That means the only other person the prophecy could be talking about at this current stage would be Thalia, and thus she could be the one who destroys Olympus, seeing as she's older than him and will reach 16 first. Granted, I will say her actress looks way older than what, 15 she's meant to be when she died? That is not a 15-year-old, but a grown-ass woman. Then again, Percy doesn't actually look 13 either, and you just have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. Sally notices that Percy's out of it, which I liked, and briefly mentions it to him, until Percy yells to watch out as Blackjack is just standing on the road. Percy goes out to talk to him, but since they haven't cast anybody as the voice, we don't follow that scene, and instead we stay inside the car, and have a little sequence here. Sally wistfully talks about how they're all growing up so fast and have so much to carry, which in turn prompts Annabeth to respond that this is why Thalia coming back is such a good thing. She'll be able to help Percy carry some of that weight. We have a fun little moment where Tyson then asks whether this means that Thalia will be the one in the prophecy instead of Percy, which gets Grover a bit annoyed because this is clearly not something he wants Sally to know about, and he scrambles to try to explain how it's no big deal. Grover and Sally scenes always make me laugh. Percy knocks on the window and reveals that Clarice never actually made it to camp, and that she took off on foot into the woods to get to camp that way. Why does she do this though? Blackjack can fly, is fast, and could soar over the top of camp and get in that way. We already know that he can do this because he's not a monster, and Luke rode him inside camp in the first episode. So why wouldn't she just fly all the way there? I doubt they'd be able to snipe her out with the flaming rocks or anything like that. Instead, she's choosing to run through the forest? I understand it's a necessary thing for the story, but I think they could have made it make a bit more sense, right? They all head towards the forest and Sally tries to come along, but we get this very beautiful emotional plea from Percy that she has to stay behind. This feels exactly like when he watched her be attacked by the Minotaur, and he can't have that again. I really like that when she heard that, she agreed with him instantly, despite being firm previously, as it shows she's not an idiot. She can acknowledge it would be too dangerous for her, but that her son has strength and powers that can keep him safe. You could even argue that her coming along would put him in more danger because he'd very obviously be trying to protect her, and thus might take more risks to himself to do so. He then also talks about his fears about Thalia. He tells Sally that the dream she had about the trident and the scythe on either side of a drachma, which he initially interpreted as being about him, and the two sides / the choice he had to make. However, now he thinks that it's more likely referring to him and Thalia and the clash they'll have as champions for each side of the coming war. Obviously, we know that Percy's wrong about Thalia and that she'll fight for Olympus in the end, but I do think that Percy is right to be nervous about this, especially since both he and his mum have been having some funky dreams about it. Why wouldn't he think that? Everything he's heard about her suggests that she hates Zeus, and that in turn might lead to her joining Luke too. So I like that they included this early suspicion, which will in turn lead to drama going forward into season 3. We then finally cut to the inside of Camp Half-Blood, where Tantalus continues to prove that he is largely useless, probably willfully so to tell you the truth. Despite the fact that the camp's been under siege for a couple of days, he's ignoring the threat even as giants are managing to get inside camp borders. I really enjoyed this scene to tell you you the truth, because I thought it was some clever misdirection. Of course, for those that know the books, you'd know that Chris Rodriguez is actually a traitor, and that he's working alongside Luke. Thus, this scene hints to that being the case, but also obscures it for those that might not know the story quite as well. Chris arrives saying another giant made it through the barrier, and he throws down his club, implying that he killed it. However, then Tantalus gets sniped out by a giant just as he thinks his curse has been lifted by the gods. And what did that giant not have on hand? A club, which implies it was led in by Chris, who took the club and distracted the campers and Tantalus whilst the giant lined up the shot. So you can already see those hints that he's working alongside Luke's forces, which I think is really fun. It's just a well-constructed scene. I also just love the idea that the gods were actively watching Tantalus' speech and thus probably noticed the giant sneaking up to kill him, and therefore they lifted his curse just long enough to have hope before he dies. It's a bit petty, yes, but it's also extremely funny and well-deserved. Read up into this dude's lore. He sucks and he deserves damnation. Imagine cooking your son. Brutal. Even better is that he clearly has no remorse for any of it, so off to the underworld you go to starve forevermore. We then check in with Bronte, Annabeth's sister, who seems to be leading the immediate defensive camp with a ragtag band of campers who are just hiding behind the barrier and trying to kill the giants bombarding the tree. But of course, they're having some very limited success. They're firing blindly through the smoke with their tiny little bows and not hitting anything. Honestly, Hephaestus' cabin should have built guns by this point, right? Still using bows in the current year? Come on now. It's clearly possible to use celestial bronze firearms, as Ares gave some to Clarice on her warship after all. They gotta get their heads in the game. Percy and his gang witness all of this and then realize there's no way that Clarice came this way to the camp. Tyson then hears a noise and we see that Luke and all his team roll up in cars and trucks with a little army of demigods and giants hopping out. Luckily, Tyson's there listening in and is able to perfectly mimic the conversation of Percy and the team so they know what's going on. Allison steps up to Luke and says that they need to destroy the tree, but Luke reveals the truth. They're going to destroy the camp and kill the campers, and then afterwards they'll be able to use the Fleece to heal Thalia, as a child of the big three is going to decide the war, and he thinks Thalia will join them. Clearly, Allison's not on board with this though, and even though that storyline doesn't come to a head this season, it does feel like she keeps challenging Luke. What happens there? Is he going to humble her at some point? Kill her maybe? However, it does feel as if anybody's going to defeat her properly, it should be Annabeth, as she's being set up to be very antagonistic towards her specifically, but then there's also this bubbling along too, so I'm not really sure. I'm very intrigued with how they're fleshing out the Kronos army and the characters within. In that context, I don't mind them having some original characters. It just makes sense to have different generals and commanders that aren't just Luke. From here, we finally cut over to Clarice, who's still running through the woods trying to get to camp, although the fact that Percy and the gang were able to get where they were going so quickly, and yet she's still wandering the forest, it makes for a bit of a funky timeline. Especially since she flew there directly whilst they had to drive. It's just a bit odd. Clarice runs through the forest and is almost shot by one of the campers until they realize who she is. Unluckily for her though, she runs right into Chris. She tells them about the Fleece and that they'll be able to fix the barrier by healing Thalia's tree with it. And once again, I love the little subtleties you see with Chris. The look on his face when he hears Clarice has the golden fleece and he realizes he'll be able to take it from her and get it to Luke. Plus there's a knowledge from before that they have a team inside camp letting in monsters. But I also like that if you don't know ahead of time, well, it just seems like he's in shock, right? It's just a really well done scene. Here we finally have a pretty key scene with Annabeth and Percy. Percy openly wonders how the hell Luke even knows they'll be able to use the Fleece to bring Thalia back to life, and Annabeth replies that it's because she told him. Her motive of course being that for Luke, the only thing more important than Kronos is Thalia, and if she comes back and sides with Olympus, she thinks perhaps Luke will come back to their side. Of course, once again, we know that that's not going to happen, but she can't know this. And I really like this scene as it's clearly one that has no right or wrong answer. Annabeth is correct that Luke may be swayed by Thalia, as he clearly has romantic feelings for her. At the same time though, Percy's also right. Annabeth's not taking into account that if Luke could be swayed by Thalia, then so too could Thalia be swayed by Luke to fight for Kronos instead. I like that they're both right here and there's no obvious solution. That being said, I'm not sure why Percy's so upset. No matter what, Luke is going to attack camp. That was always the plan. No matter what, they were always going to use the Golden Fleece to heal Thalia's tree. They need to in order to strengthen the barrier. So regardless of what Luke knows, the plan doesn't change. I want to talk about tone deaf when Percy's telling Annabeth that Thalia's going to have to choose between two friends, herself or Luke, and that Annabeth can't know how tough that choice would be. However, she obviously can, because she has faced that choice many times. She constantly chooses to side with Percy as opposed to siding with Luke, but of course, he can't seem to see that right now. They keep moving and come up with a new plan. Percy and Tyson will go help camp, whilst Grover and Annabeth will track Clarice and the Fleece as Grover's able to follow the scent of Pan or whatever it was. However, their plans are scuppered by the arrival of one of the border defense teams, this one being led by Clarice's brother Alice. You can really tell he's a son of Ares, can't you? Despite the fact that Percy and Tyson are among the stronger warriors of the camp and there's a huge siege ongoing, he's more incensed at the idea of them stealing Clarice's quest to the point that he's willing to kill them if they resist arrest. This is something I've noticed a lot of, to be honest, a desire to kill people, but these aren't demigods from ancient times where that sort of thing is normalized. Some of these are just random people, and they're so willing to resort to extreme violence, even against people they've known for years. One day you're toasting marshmallows by the fire, singing camp songs, and then next you want to execute people you know quite well, likely have known for years in the case of Annabeth. What about dudes like Luke and the other older demigods fighting for Kronos? There are little kids at the camp who are very young. Are they seriously on board with just killing these children like that? How do you disconnect from morality so quickly? Are demigod children more predisposed to being psychopaths or something? What's going on here? They're taken before Mr. D, who's now completely in charge of camp, seeing as he has nobody to delegate any responsibility to, with Tantalus being dead. Percy comes in and tries to warn him about the Fleece and the army outside, but of course, Mr. D doesn't care. It's kind of odd he behaves this way though. He denies the Titans are back and that Kronos is back, but we see later on that Poseidon 100% believes that it's true and that he's likely already fighting an underwater war. Is it more that only the absolute top tier of gods believe it? Is Zeus mostly keeping it under wraps? Because otherwise you think that they'd take this seriously. You would also think that Zeus would lift that rule about not being more actively involved here. Why is he not throwing thunderbolts down on some of the monsters? We see later on that he doesn't mind bending the rules like that after all when he kills his own daughter. So surely keeping your demigod support base alive and well is the better move. Oh well, I guess the gods are supposed to be somewhat arrogant and foolish, right? Percy then gives a really awesome speech about how this is it. They can't rely on anybody else. Nobody's coming to save them, and the gods clearly don't care enough to intervene. So if they're going to survive, they need to be real heroes and defend their home, and I loved it. I'm a sucker for a good battle speech, and this one was pretty damn good. Speaking of battle, we then cut back over to Bronte and her archers, who are still doing their best to hit at least one giant. The bombardment stops, and anybody who's ever seen a war movie knows that when bombardment stops, it is preceding a charge by the enemy, which is exactly what happens. The Kronos demigod army charges, and the scene cuts away. I will say that the shot of them charging, screaming out of the smoke went very hard. I'm just curious, why weren't they wearing any armor? I mean, they all have weapons, but surely it couldn't hurt to defend yourself, right? From this point onwards, things really start to pick up. We cut back over to Clarice, ready for Chris to make his big move. He keeps up the facade for a little bit, telling her the barrier is breaking, and so is the trust between the different campers. He accuses Katie, the camper that shot at Clarice, of being one of Luke's loyalists, which of course gets the attention of the entire patrol. Whilst they're distracted, he and his goons are able to subdue the actual loyal campers, and he in turn stabs Katie, although it doesn't look lethal. He then demands that Clarice hand over the Fleece and says to her that he'll tell Luke that she died well. The hell? Like I said, it's like they become completely malicious and devoid of any sort of morality and kindness. I think in the early stages that this sort of thing, being a traitor to the camp, it should be treated like Luke's portrayal at the end of season 1. They should seem sad and reluctant, as if they're sorry that it came to this and they don't really want to hurt their friends, but they have no choice. The fight begins, and it seems that these campers are a tougher bit of business for Clarice and the crew on the ship because she does struggle against them, and Chris manages to wound her enough that she has to flee. She is pretty tough though, because she straight up gets slashed on the back of her leg and is still able to run all the way to the chariot grounds. Also, I only just noticed this, but did she seriously take the pointy stick as her weapon when there were actual spears on the ship she could have used? Hell, didn't she use a spear to kill one of the giants? Why is she still using a sharpened stick like some sort of murder hobo? She makes it to the chariot ground and is knocked to the ground by Chris and his goons, with Chris then telling her biggest mistake was thinking they were friends as he picks up the Fleece. So yeah, this dude just seems like a massive piece of shit, which begs the question, how are you going to redeem him and have this be a romance, like, at all? He betrays the camp, he attacks her with the intention of executing her, he chases her down and shit talks about how they were never friends and that she has 0 friends. For me, I think if you were going to go with a romantic entanglement, you had to really have him be more reluctant and not do pretty much any of what he's doing. Otherwise it feels a bit weird. Annabeth and Grover come to the rescue on a chariot, stealing the Fleece and snatching up Clarice before we cut over to the main event. In the off-screen battle, Bronte and her soldiers were very obviously defeated with ease because they're barely characters at all. It would be ridiculous if they were able to put up much of a fight. Luke's forces have to look strong after all. Of course, this scene does somewhat fall victim to the show's identity crisis. On one hand, Luke and his demigods talked about how they were going to kill all of the campers. We saw them charging Bronte's squad head on, and they were wielding swords. A cutaway is the perfect time for some off-screen deaths, to tell you the truth, and yet when we came back, they were only disarmed. I get that it's ultimately a show that remains kid-friendly, but then why have the villains talk about how bloodthirsty they are if that's the case? Whilst this is going on, Luke walks up to Thalia's tree and has a moment. I like that you can openly see the regret on his face for poisoning her, the fear that he's made the wrong choice in siding with Kronos, and probably also a bit of fear that she won't choose him if it comes down to him and Annabeth. He turns to allow some of the giants in, but he only gets one inside before Percy and his army roll up on them. They have a pretty cool stare down, and since Luke and his army are all apparently idiots, despite the other giants yelling at them to let them in, nobody does, and they charge instead, and we enter what is the first ever large-scale battle in the show's run. I know that a lot of people didn't want something like this in the show just yet, as they think a battle within the confines of camp this early is going to make Battle of the Labyrinth feel less exciting. I disagree though, and I think the show actually benefits from upping the stakes this early on, and making the uprising seem like a legitimate threat into season 3. I also note that many people were upset that there were no party ponies, and this I actually do agree with. Let's be real, many modern battle sequences model themselves after battle scenes you see in The Lord of the Rings. Thus, they could have done some sort of Gandalf arrival at Helm's Deep reference. Percy's side could be losing, maybe somebody lets in the rest of the giants, and then the centaurs ride in and they kick ass, killing giants and scaring off the demigods. I also think this would have helped to redeem Chiron a lot more after what's revealed, and also show that he'll stand up for the heroes even if the gods won't. The battle itself is pretty fun, and we mostly hone in on Percy and Luke kicking ass, with Luke determined to get to Percy, and when he does, he destroys him. I did like that they showed that Percy learned and was able to disarm Luke like Luke did to him in their previous fight, but at the same time, it is so awesome that Luke wrecks him here. He beats the hell out of him with numerous punches to the face and knocks him to the ground. I loved how the sound got muffled after that first punch to simulate the woozy effect with Percy. I think it's so good that they're making sure to show that Luke is just so much better than Percy at this stage of the game. Luke's team ends up losing the battle, and so I think it was important to give him this personal victory, plus it gives Percy his own arc over the course of the season, where he slowly gets stronger. Luke tells Percy it was never him that was the prophecy child, it was always Thalia. And another thing I've noticed over the course of the season is the slow descent into hatred Luke's got going on. In season 1, he considered Percy a friend, even if he knew he was going to betray him in the end. When they met again at the start of this season, even though Percy was antagonistic towards him, he did genuinely want him on side and for Percy to join him fighting Olympus. After that, they worked together to save Annabeth with the Golden Fleece, and it really seems like only it was after he realized that Annabeth was willing to lie to him on the ship about Percy being there that he's turned so hateful towards Percy. It's almost like he blames him now for Annabeth not siding with him against Olympus. Luke then goes for the killing blow and is stopped by Tyson, the Chadclops, who beats Luke with his trident and sends him flying out of the battle completely, before helping Percy to his feet and getting back into it. I love Tyson so much. I'm really going to miss his character being in the cool group during season 3. The chariot makes its entrance, and this was probably my most shocking moment of the episode, as I was not expecting Annabeth to get sniped off the chariot by Allison like that. For me, this probably cements that at some point these two are going to have one last showdown, right? I mean, Allison is really honing in on Annabeth in particular for her falling off the ship, even though Percy was there too and Allison was trying to murder them. Despite this brief triumph though, Allison quickly realizes they're losing the battle, and they need those giants inside to help them fight, so what does she do? She grabs an axe and starts trying to chop down Thalia's tree alongside a bunch of others. You know what's funny though? None of the orange shirts are attacking them, so they should be able to just walk over to the barrier and let each of the giants in to even the odds. Instead, she decides to explicitly go against orders, which in turn would surely get her horrendously punished by Kronos, right? The prophecy explicitly says that a child of the Big Three is going to decide the war, and thus this would leave Percy as the only one left, and he's clearly not going to be joining Kronos at this stage. So that means they'd either have to kill Percy before he turns 16, or they'd be absolutely cooked, right? I do feel all her descent is going to come back to bite her one of these days, perhaps during season 3. Knowing that they have no more time, Percy takes Clarice's pointy stick and stabs it into the Golden Fleece before handing it off to Clarice, who throws it at the tree. It instantly starts doing its thing, and Thalia comes back shouting never and calls down some lightning before she passes out, some of which hits Percy and knocks him out, so that we conveniently don't see how the rest of the battle plays out and what happens next. He wakes up thinking he's dead, only to be informed by his divine deadbeat that he is not dead but instead within a dream. They briefly talk about how the war has actually started, and here we got something that I thought was a bit of a bummer. Poseidon thanks Percy for looking after his son, and Tyson appears. Poseidon tells him the forges of Hephaestus are located within Poseidon's realm, and I do wonder why that even is. Wouldn't his workshop be on Olympus? Isn't that where it is in the Greek myths? Putting a forge, which uses fire, under the water just seems very stupid. Isn't he a god of fire? Also, why does Poseidon call him brother? Isn't he his nephew? How do you get this very key piece of lore wrong? He's Hera's son. That's one of the most important parts of his story. Hera is, of course, Poseidon's sister and sister-in-law. I just don't see how this mistake makes it to the screen, although maybe you could argue they're sworn brothers or some shit, even if that's a little bit shaky. He tells Tyson he needs to go there to help forge weapons for the war to come, and Tyson agrees and thanks him for sending him Percy when he asks for a friend. It's absurdly cute. That being said, I do think it's sad he's leaving to go and live with the Cyclops after all. I think it would have been nice if he kept living with Sally and Percy, and then went to the Forge during the summer when Percy goes to Camp Half-Blood. I just really think their dynamic in this season is much more interesting and powerful than it was in the book. It would be a shame to not continue that onwards, especially after you've had Sally call herself his mum in an earlier episode. Percy, desperate for any sort of connection with his dad, then asks if maybe he needs any help, and Poseidon tells him that his destiny lies elsewhere with the Great Prophecy. He had intended to wait and tell Percy nearer to his 16th birthday, which feels absurdly reckless. As soon as he was born, he was on a timer for when this might be important, and you're planning on waiting until maybe a year before he has to make that choice to tell him? It seems that all the gods are just so incompetent, right? Percy asks whether the only reason he was born was because of the Great Prophecy, and Poseidon replies that some things are stronger than the will of the gods. Fate is one of them, and love is the other, which sets Percy's mind at ease. That being said, I am a little bit surprised at how positively they're portraying Poseidon. I know he's pretty good in the books as well, but in this adaptation, I felt like they were starting a pivot to showcase that the gods are really not all that good, and are simply the better option than Kronos. I thought the penny would eventually drop and Percy would see a darker side of his father that gives him doubts as to what to do. But nope. Other gods, yes, Poseidon not so much. He seems to be a very good dad. Well, as good a dad as an absentee can be. Still, I do wonder if they'll continue down that path the whole way, or whether they add a bit of nuance to his character at some point. I suppose we'll have to wait and see, but based on all of this, I don't think it's likely. He tells Percy never to underestimate himself, which in turn makes Percy think about what Thalia said when she came out of the tree. Never. He asks if Poseidon knows what she meant, and he tells Percy to brace himself before he wakes up. So I guess everybody knew that Thalia was murdered by Zeus then? Or at the very least, they likely suspected this was the case? After all, Hades would know that his Furies didn't do it, so I could see him spreading the word, I guess. Percy wakes up Lord of the Rings style and learns that he's been out for 3 days, with Chiron having returned and approved the use of all the nectar they had in storage to heal people's wounds. And it seems that Percy and Thalia are the last to wake up. Do we reckon that Thalia is also having godly dreams right now where Zeus is trying to reason with her and explain himself? Or do we think she's just out like a light? That would be a pretty interesting scene, not gonna lie. Then again, since she wakes up and knows nothing, maybe she's just unconscious. Percy and gang go over to see Chiron, where Clarice has just been put in charge of training their strike force, and we have a cute little wrap-up scene to this story here. She tells Percy and Annabeth there will always be a place for them in her squad, whilst Percy tells her to call him Jackson, and also tell him to shut up, so I guess to maintain that frenemy vibe and diffuse the awkward realization that they're now actually genuine friends. Once again, I feel that Clarice's whole arc this season has been one of the best writing choices they've made, and it made her seem like a fully realized and fleshed out character. In the book, she feels very generic and two-dimensional, and so I much prefer this, much as I prefer this version of Tyson too. As the others leave, Percy, Grover, and Annabeth approach Chiron so that Percy can welcome him back. Chiron apologizes for never revealing his connection to Kronos in the previous summer, but that being said, it's not like he hid it either. It's straight up public knowledge that Kronos is his dad. If Percy gave him a quick Google search when he was at home, that would have been it. Hell, just go to a library or a museum. On top of that, Kronos has plenty of other kids, so he shouldn't even need to apologize for this. He continues by saying that he regrets many other things too. That he's always tried to heed the will of the gods while setting an example for the demigods he trains and protects. However, now he's at a crossroads. He can't continue to do both, and so he chooses his demigods, which to me was extremely cute. He says they deserve to know the truth about what happened the night that Grover brought Annabeth to camp, and springs into his explanation. At a distance, he saw the Furies land and was going to help Thalia fight, but noticed that they didn't attack her. Instead, they stood at a distance talking until they were zapped by Zeus and destroyed. So what was Hades' motive here? In the book, he sends them to kill her outright because I'm pretty sure he's angry that Maria D'Angelo was killed and the Zeus targeted his 2 other children, forcing him to hide them in the Lotus Casino for what, 60 years or so? Here, he sees a chance to get some vengeance and he takes it, showcasing yet another god being an absolute piece of shit. Instead though, here we have him obviously trying to turn her against Zeus, but with what purpose? Obviously, he wouldn't want her to join Kronos, so what's the idea? Does he want her to be his champion? Did he in turn expect that this would lead to Zeus killing her in anger and thus he could keep his hands clean, so to speak, while still getting a revenge? I have a lot of questions here. So now we have an almost entirely good Poseidon, a middle-of-the-road Hades who seems to lean more good than bad for now, but then also a straight-up evil Zeus, stripping away even the love of his children that he had in the book. He approaches her and claims that what she heard was all lies, while demanding that she call him father. He says the great prophecy is very real, and she has to be on the right side of it, thereby revealing that Hades' goons weren't lying at all, and he's talking bullshit. He says that she's almost 16, which is a dangerous age, and she could live here in Camp Half-Blood where she'd be safe and idolized by the other demigods because of her power and noble bloodline. To me, this shows very much how disconnected he is from her. He thinks that this is something that she'd actually care about when all she really cares about is protecting Luke and Annabeth. She walks away saying she doesn't want to be his daughter, and she will never be his weapon, and then he roasts her with a thunderbolt and turns her into a tree. So now he just seems outright evil, right? As soon as she slightly defies him, he kills her. Straight up murdered her. I don't really see how you can come back from this for his character. Percy's obviously fighting for Olympus, but how do you justify somebody like Zeus being the undisputed king of gods? Is he actually any different from Kronos in that case? The book makes him seem like the best option, but this throws this into doubt. They really will have to go hard in making the Titans seem truly monstrous in future seasons to come back from this, I think. So whilst I did enjoy the sequence, it does leave me with worries and questions as to where they go from here. I also wonder, did he lightning her into a tree, or did he zap her and then realize what he did and so spare her afterwards by turning her into the tree? Chiron then tells the kids that when it happened, Zeus forced him to lie, but now he's going to tell the truth about it, which, you know, is kind of fair enough. I get being upset with him, but at the same time, if he didn't lie, he would have been thunderbolted too, and I'm pretty sure anybody he told would have been thunderbolted as well, just to preserve the lie of Zeus being the benevolent god king. Like I said, I'm very curious as to how the hell they turn it around for the Lord of the Sky, because he just comes out of this seemingly so conniving and evil. Chiron tells them that when he heard of the quest for the Fleece, he expected this would be Kronos attempting to turn Percy to his side to attain his champion for the war. But now he knows that Kronos was always after Thalia, and the intent was always to try to bring her back against Zeus. Here, Kronos does confuse me though, because why would you hide this from Luke to begin with, you know? Maybe because he wanted to keep his options open? If Percy did end up siding with Kronos, there's no reason to bring Thalia back and risk her siding with Olympus, so sacrificing the tree would allow him to sweep into Camp Half-Blood for the victory. Thalia then enters the room having woken up, and this scene was just awesome. She has a cute little moment with Annabeth, which I will admit got me a teensy bit emotional, and then an epic stare down with Percy. I'm keen to see how all of this plays out, with Percy being extremely suspicious of Thalia and certain she's going to join Luke in the end. I'm actually so pumped for season 3 now, way more than I was for season 2 coming out of the first season. Then we have that little snippet of Percy and Annabeth dancing in the season 3 sneak peek and the confirmation it's going to be coming this year? Hell yeah! However, we also had a sad little scene back on Circe's island, where she has 2 new statues constructed of Percy and Annabeth. She's manipulating the other remaining demigods into believing her program works, which honestly was just bleak and depressing. Anyway, this leads us to the end of the season, and I think it was a really good one. Yes, it does diverge from the books, but at the same time, some of these changes were actually well implemented. Alongside this, I think they did inject a bit more of the goofiness of the books into the world, although I think they need to add a bit more of it next season at the same time. It was a massive improvement from season 1, and I'm keen to see where things lead. So with all that being said, these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode and the season itself? Did you like it? Hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.